We're recording and live.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for your indulgence and patience while we undertook the procedural steps to move this hearing forward while protecting privileged or private information and only that information. As I see attendees begin to trickle back in, I see that it seems as though this was, in spite of all of the possibilities for technical glitches, by and large, we've been able to get out, do the business of this executive session and get back without losing, hopefully, anyone along the way. I'm going to give it a few moments and allow folks to find their way back and repopulate our sort of public attendees list. And then we will pick up, having heard only the privileged and protected medical information that relates to this application. We will undertake to begin the real substantive sort of built environment components and the criteria as it pertains to the relief being sought. So with that, I see that we have about 20 attendees back in the room. 8 panelists are still there. What I will do is while folks begin to trickle back in, we will go back into our public session, having ended executive session. And Attorney Mead, on behalf of the applicant, you have the floor to present the application. Knowing that the ZBA has taken in any sensitive information or privileged information during executive session, you may simply just refer for the record to materials or details discussed in executive session and simply identify whatever it is that way, if it makes sense to do so. And you
Sure.
certainly do something differently. But why don't you go ahead and pick up where we left off, and you have the floor. We're still in presentation from the applicant.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, for the record, Lisa Mead, Telemann Costa, here with the applicant, Joseph Cohen and Robin Wallace, and the architect, Kevin Latati. Ms. Wallace has owned this property since 2007. She and Mr. Cohen and their 2 children are about to permanently occupy this property. It is a pre-existing non-conforming 2-family structure. There is a small unit on the first floor and a modest unit on the second floor. This is a little bit different than the board is used to. The applicants are requesting, yes, a special permit and variance. The variance is for a 3rd floor living space on the island. The special permit is for the intensification of the FAR and some impacts on the sideline setbacks by the addition of a deck. However, under the ADA, there's a 3-step process or criteria that needs to be applied when considering a reasonable accommodation, which would be, in our opinion, allow the board to waive the requirements of any local ordinances, bylaws, regulations, or rules related to the requested accommodation. If the applicant has a disability, the ADA coordinator has affirmed this by evidence provided by the applicant. Next, the board has to determine whether or not the modifications to the property are reasonably necessary to accommodate the disability and afford the individual an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the housing of their choice. If the answer to those is yes, or if the board decides the answer is no, the board then carries the burden, or the city carries the burden, that if the board does not grant the waiver, that the modification would fundamentally and unreasonably alter the nature and purpose of the zoning ordinance. So with that, and without waiving any of my rights under the ADA, I will certainly present why we believe this application also meets the criteria related to a special permit and a variance. So here is the existing lot. As you can see, Northern Boulevard is the bottom. 79th Street is a 10-foot wide street, so to speak, in quotes, to the left-hand side of this property, which is actually the front yard. You can see the lot has a very odd shape with that kind of triangle taken out of the top of it, and has 2 narrow points at the top. And as you can see, the existing conditions photos. If you go to the next slide, please. This slide shows the proposed improvements. And you will see that in dark red is where the proposed entry and elevator area will go. There is a proposed third story addition that is above the second story deck. You can see that in the darker hashed outlines. In the lighter hashed outlines, you can see two new proposed decks, one at the back to allow some outdoor space on the second floor, and that little piece off to the left in the front yard, which is one of the, it doesn't actually intensify the front yard because of the existing deck and stairs, but it does encroach a little bit more than the house does itself. And then on the right-hand side, the new deck actually intensifies a little bit the right side setback non-conformity. And if you go to the next slide, please. Here is the GIS. You can better see the location of the property and in what is referred to as 79th Street and Northern Boulevard, and where the house is. And the new addition of the deck is at the top of the lot, right above 7786. And then Kevin will go over in a minute the proposed changes to the structure itself. Next slide, please. So Kevin, these are the existing plans, and then they run into the proposed plans. So I'm going to give this to you, and as part of your presentation, you're going to talk about FAR. I do want to just follow my sword here a minute for the board. The FAR that is on these plans was provided to the planning department at the request of the zoning code enforcement officer and is accurate. There was a mistake on the site plan that was submitted today, but the FAR that Kevin's going to go over is accurate. And the zoning code enforcement officer has also reviewed it. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the existing conditions and the need for additional, at least showing the additional space.
Okay. How's everyone doing? I'm Kevin Latati from Latati Design. You're looking at the existing first floor unit. This is a separate unit from the second story. So this is the existing first floor unit. The next slide will show you the existing second floor unit with dimensions to give you an idea of the size of these spaces. The entry is rather small, sort of a little mudroom closet directly into the kitchen. The dining room is off of that. The living room is off of that. There are stairs, as you can see, up to the attic, the third floor, a narrow hallway down to the bathroom and bedrooms 1 and 2. There's an existing deck and stairs there, as you can see, and then go up to the third floor where you can see what's now an existing attic space. The ceiling height there existing is 6'6", sloping down to the knee walls on either side at 3'6". This sort of storage closets, and then you can come out to a balcony that overlooks the living room below. That's a cathedral ceiling under that part. So that's the existing conditions. If you want to look at the next slide is the existing elevations. Then the next slide is existing structure and an FAR of the existing structure. You can read that. First level is 874. Second level is 982, and the third level as counted as 130 square feet. A total of 1,986 square feet on a site area of 3,802. The proposed in the next slide will show you the FAR. Adding the elevator and a larger entrance on the first floor, and we can go over this in more detail on the enlarged plans, but this gives you an idea of FAR. On first floor is 874, and with the addition for the elevator space, it comes up to 929. On the second floor, adding the elevator space, again, just a small increase from 982 to 990. On the third floor, the proposal, giving more accessibility for the individual. Currently, as you can see on the second floor space, and the clients will be living on the second and proposed third floor. The third floor will accommodate a living space that can accommodate the disabilities. And that is going from 130 square feet up to 560 square feet on the third level. In the section, you can see that quickly that we've maintained the roof on the east side. As you're coming down Northern Boulevard, that roof slope will change, and we're raising the ridge beam at the center to provide a dormer off of that to accommodate ceiling height required on the third floor to meet the building code requirements and the accessibility of the Mr. Cohen, who will be living up there. If we go to slide 10, this is the first floor plan. Again, we've added the area for the elevator and an entrance into that area. Second floor plan, again, it's the elevator and an entrance to accommodate that. The existing deck, and then we're proposing to add a 130 square foot deck, which will allow for better seating on the outside. Right now, with the elevator added and that larger entrance, it pretty much eats up what is there now as a deck. So mostly that deck area becomes circulation space. So we've proposed an added deck area for the ability to go outside and enjoy some outside time. Third floor, this is where we've raised the center ridge beam to accommodate a dormer on the west side, which faces the Merrimack River. So there's a accessible bathroom area. The elevator comes up to that space, and a storage area that will be needed for some of the materials that will be needed for the accessible living considerations. So that's it for the plans. Lisa, do you have any?
You want to do the elevations,
Okay, the
please,
elevation,
Kevin?
sure.
So that, right.
Yeah, so the elevations, again, the east elevation is when you're looking at it from Northern Boulevard. The roof on that eastern side stays the same, and then we've raised up the ridge beam to accommodate the dormer. The north elevation, you can see where that dormer comes up, and then the elevator and storage area, we've kept that roof not in the slope, but try to keep that height down, and that's required for the elevator clearance height above. We need to have that roof a little bit higher than, say, where you can see the eave line is on the existing roof. The west elevation is the side that faces 79th Street. There is to the left of the roof area that you can see where it comes flat, that's the elevator shaft and storage room. That is just on the third floor that you have that, and that cantilevers over the deck. And then the south elevation is what you would see from the extension of Northern Boulevard that comes down to the beach. So that's the elevations you see. The next slide is a section view. So again, you can see the second floor level with the the cathedral ceiling that is existing in the living room, that roof stays there, and then the raised ridge with the dormered roof over the new living space for the third floor.
Thank you, Kevin. The next slide is just for ease of reference, the dimensional requirements which you have. But as you can see here, of the existing non-conformities, there's actually side setback A intensifies it a little bit from 17.4 to 12.5. Otherwise, the intensification is with regard to the FAR from 0.52 to 68. And the property, of course, is non-conforming for a lot area and frontage in addition to the other setbacks. And then here are some photographs. Next slide, please. This is the existing structure. And this back corner area is where all the work is going to be done. Next slide, please. And again, this is beside the house coming in off of Northern Boulevard, and 79th Street is right at the bottom of the screen. Next slide, please. And again, Northern Boulevard, looking down towards the end of Northern Boulevard. Next slide, please. And this is facing the house. So on the left-hand side is where you're going to see the roof being raised. Next slide, please. And this is going down Northern Boulevard. There's going to be some window changes maybe on this side, Kevin, but that's about it, I think. Is that right?
No, you're not going to see any window changes on.
No changes on this side. Okay, next slide, please. And then this is right along the edge where you're going to see the elevator is going to go in at the end of this wall here. Next slide, please. And here is the opposite end, the northern end of the structure. As you can see, it already has kind of a little bit of a funky shape to it. Next slide, please. And again, you can see this in Kevin's drawings, how this all works architecturally, how he's trying to match it to some extent and bring it all together. Next slide, please. And here is the entryway on the bottom. If you could go to the next slide, please. So alternatively, as we go through the criteria for a special permit, I just want to point out to the board, based upon conversations with the city, we also looked at, is there an alternative not to make living space on the third floor? And the answer would be no. It would actually be worse as far as Plum Island is concerned. So as the board knows, special permit criteria for a pre-existing non-conforming structure to be modified on Plum Island is whether or not the proposed reconstruction, extension, or alteration is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood and or the island. And in this instance, adding the 560 square feet on the second floor, first of all, it's not possible without going into the neighbor's yard or being within this 10-foot setbacks. But in addition, it would be on the second floor. It would require additional pilings to be placed, whereas the proposed addition is within the footprint, but for the extension out over the deck of the existing structure. And so here's, if you were to add 560 square feet to the second floor in one formation, and the next slide, please, Caitlin. And here it is in the other formation. And obviously that can't happen because you can't go into the neighbor's property. But in addition, it would have the same issues related to larger impacts on the purpose and intent of the Plum Island Overlay District. Next slide, please. I've already, I'm going to address this. So as I said earlier, we've proven that there's a disability. We believe that through all of these alterations and various mechanisms, we've tried to have alternatives, and we have done it in as a concise and compact way as possible. Obviously, the submission, we have to have an elevator in order to access the living unit. Even if it weren't on the third floor, then we have to get to the second floor. And we've shown that the existing living space is not sufficient to accommodate the needs of the applicant. And we believe we've shown that the added living space of 560 square feet is as small as it can be in order to provide for those needs that we have described for you in the executive session. Next slide, please. So as we go through the special permit for nonconformities, as I said, it relates to the side yard setbacks. While it extends it, it doesn't exacerbate it. And the FAR increase of 0.52 to 0.68. We continue to have the required parking. There are no additional posts or pilings, and therefore no interference with the flow of water or sand. I would add to you that the mechanicals of the elevator are in the top of the elevator, and it is a pitless elevator that has an 8-inch depression, which has been reviewed by the Conservation Commission, which I would be remiss if I didn't mention. We have appeared before the Conservation Commission once. They only had 4 members in attendance, and we presented to the Conservation Commission. 2 of the members were satisfied with the material we presented and looked favorably upon the application. 2 other members wanted a little bit more information, and not unexpected. They also like to see what the zoning board is going to do before they act. And we are back before the Conservation Commission a week from today. As I said earlier, the FAR is currently non-conforming, and so we are increasing it slightly, but again, it's within the existing footprint. It will not have a larger impact on the dune system or environmentally sensitive areas. All construction will be done above the floodplain except the base of the elevator and the entry, and it will continue to be a 2-family. Next slide, please. So the next relief that the applicant needs, if the board decides that they're going to apply these criteria, is a variance for the creation of a 3rd floor. Here, as I pointed out, the property has an odd shape that is unique and is preventing the needed additional living space on the 2nd floor, as I pointed out also. The literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would involve substantial hardship, financial and otherwise, as we have set forth both in executive session and here, on the applicant, as he would be unable to live in his home. There will not be a substantial detriment to the public good, as the space mostly exists within the roof area or footprint and is merely being raised as a portion of the home to allow the accommodation. And again, all of the living space, but for that entry, will be added above the floodplain. Further, the living space on the 3rd floor will not nullify or substantially derogate from the intent or purpose of the ordinance, as it is not unusual to have this situation on the island. I'm going to go through a series of photographs of properties on Plum Island that will show you that this is not an unusual situation. If we could just kind of go down through these, Caitlin, we have 1367th Street, clearly 3rd floor living. 11 Basin Street has some 3rd floor living there. 9K Street, we think that might, but I can't guarantee it, but it sure does look like there's some up there. Next slide, please. Again, here, 960th Street, you can see the rear dormer, 3rd story. Next slide. 6S Street has some additional living space on the 3rd floor. Next slide, please. 5 to 759th Street. Next slide, please. 577th Street. Next slide, please. 567th Street. Next. 562nd Street. You can see the living space on that 3rd floor. 459th Street. You can see the 3 levels on this side here that you can see there's a 3rd floor. Next slide, please. 3 Kate Street. You can see those dormers on top. Next slide, please. 377th, again, 3rd floor. Next. 1 P Street. Next slide. What is this? I don't have those. 170th Street. Next slide, please. 266 North End Boulevard, which is actually not far from here. This is an older house. It's certainly pre-existing non-conforming for sure. But the reason I also pointed this out is the architecture, which is just on the right, just south of the proposal. Next slide, please. 258 Northern Boulevard. And next, 227 Northern Boulevard. 66 Northern Boulevard, 155 Old Point Road, 154 Old Point Road, 95 Reservation Terrace, 53 Harbor Street, 51A Reservation Terrace, 28 Basin Street, 24 Basin Street, 15 82nd Street, 18 55th Street, 14 67th Street. So the reason I point all of these out, and certainly some of these are probably pre-existing non-conforming, is my point is that it's not a substantial derogation from the existing conditions on the island. And in this instance, because there is a hardship related to lot area that we can't make the space on the second floor, it would not be an unusual thing or derogate from the purpose and intent of the ordinance. And certainly back to the criteria for the ADA, that, you know, that the fact that this modification would be fundamentally and unreasonably alter the nature and purpose of the ordinance when all of these structures already exist out there would be, I would say, would be a tough argument to make. Caitlin, if you could go back up to the site plan. With that, we believe that the applicant not only has shown that the requested accommodation to allow living space on the third floor is reasonable and necessary, that we've also provided a basis to grant a special permit under the ordinance as well as a variance under the ordinance, and we would request the consideration of the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. With that, the presentation now made, we will now move into the public comment section, and I'll just ask Caitlin to go ahead and put the slide up, and I'll ask members of the attending public to please just raise your hand, and this way we can recognize you. And once we do, we can attempt to, we'll have you unmute your mic, and bear with me a second while I try to rework this. Okay, we have one hand. I'll recognize Leela Wright. Leela, if you want to just unmute your mic, and Andy, we can unmute Leela's mic. Leela, you have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, Leela Wright, 55 Reservation Terrace. I am speaking in support of this application. My hope is that the board would find for the waiver as requested by the applicant, but in the event that the board does not consider that avenue and should further explore the need for a variance and special permit, it should be noted the odd configuration of the lot itself could meet the requirements for hardships as needed. Furthermore, I would think that the applicant's request on a personal basis should also be taken into consideration, and just wanted to lend my support. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wright. I see another hand raised. It just says Kathy. I don't have a last name, but Kathy, if that is you, you could kindly unmute your mic and we will recognize you, and just kindly give your name and address.
Can you hear me?
We can.
So I'm Mike, I'm Kathy's son.
If we could just get your full name, Mike, if you don't mind, for our record.
It's Mike Caponigro.
Thank you.
So we're good?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't tell if you gave an address yet. My apologies if I.
So our house is on 82nd Street.
Great. Thank you very much.
So I believe Caitlin has some pictures she might be able to put up, but first we want to thank the city for reattaching the no parking both sides sign back onto the 79th Street pole. The city and everyone involved can determine if the proposed addition to 479th Street meets the city regulations and requirements. Our concern has and always has been keeping 79th Street clear for proper public use and access. We've got some images there that kind of do the opposite. And I think our big concern is that if you go forward with any renovations, that we keep in mind that we've had struggles with access to our property. Whether you have construction workers and vehicles like that, we're just looking for that 79th Street to be clear. But as far as the images, unfortunately, I don't know if we can pull up some of them.
Chair, this is Caitlin. With your permission, can I show these photos?
Yes, of
Absolutely.
course. If you can go ahead through the photos for Mike and
So that right there just shows you the street down the line. You'll see that we've got the railroad ties, we've got the pole, the street sign there. So that's kind of clearly what should be. Okay. The second one, if you could pull that up. You know, this is an unfortunate one here. We had a bouncy house that was placed in the middle of the road. It was actually, let me go to my notes here. Where is it? Yeah, it was actually placed in our driveway. We weren't notified. Initially, Mr. Cohen tried setting up, you know, like I said, in our driveway and was trying to access our own electrical power. The tenants that were there asked him to move it, which he then moved to the middle of the street. What's the next picture there? Kind of shows that again. It just occupied the whole street. It'd be one thing if you had mentioned it ahead of time you're going to do it, but it was just done. And in this situation, I don't think anyone was blocked, but we do have other situations where blocked. Yeah, if you want to go to the next image there. All right, so let's get back to this. All right. So unfortunately, you know, simple tasks such as pulling out your driveway in the morning to get to work has been an ongoing frustration. There's been times when gas trucks have attempted to deliver propane and been unable to do so on multiple occasions because we've got vehicles like in that situation there. That Jeep, it doesn't really show it, but right there is our driveway going into the back part of our property. I guess just to boil this up, if the city approves the renovations on 479th Street, all we're asking for is that the street remain clear during the project. Obviously, we've had problems before with all these photos and stuff, but we're just looking for something possibly put in place to safeguard this from not happening during construction.
was that it? Was that the extent of your remarks, Mike?
I mean, if Caitlin wants to just show a couple more photos to
Sure.
reinforce like what the struggles have been. Obviously, we're just looking for, like I said, for things to be clear. You can see there, that's highlighted what the street should be like, and you can see kind of the lines there showing where we're trying to access that back part to driveway situation there. It's been blocked an awful lot. You can go down to that bottom, number 10. Here, unfortunately, is it the Papa Nicholas's? Is that?
Yeah, from their window.
So there you can kind of see that it not only was the street blocked, but it was done with side-by-side cars. So we're just looking for a little bit of respect in regards to what is supposed to be a 10-foot street, end to end, and have proper use for it for the neighbors that live there.
Very good. And did you want to go through did you want to point out any of the other photos and slides you have, or should we'll have these as part of our record?
I mean, number 9, Caitlin, it's kind of funny that it's an aerial view that was submitted by the city, and it actually shows, which is, you know, how often could that happen where you actually see the 2 cars there taking over the space. So just looking for wherever their parking spaces are supposed to be, please utilize that and leave that space open so that people can get to work and use the street properly.
Very good. Thank you very much for your remarks. Do we have anyone else wish to speak in connection with this application? I see Looks like Georgia Papanikolaou. Ms. Papanikolaou, if you could unmute your mic, you have the floor, and if you could just give your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is Georgia Papanikolaou of number 679th Street, along with my husband Emmanuel, who is at 278 Northern Boulevard. We are direct abutters to number 479th Street. We want this permit denied. There is no hardship for the dimensional relief requested.
Very good. Was there anything else, Ms. Papanikolaou?
I won't go further. Thank you.
Very good. Did your husband wish to speak as well, or were you content with?
He's right next to me. But we have both properties and they abut two sides of number 479.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, sir. Okay, anyone else wish to speak in connection with the application? I see Betsy Miriam. Miss Miriam, if you wish to unmute your mic and just give us your name and address, and you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, Betsy Miriam, and I'm not an abutter, but I live on 6 Basin Road. We saw lots of houses around me in the slides. I have lived here for 34 years, and so have seen a lot of abutters do changes, and I did some changes myself. I fully support the plan. I have enjoyed Plum Island for 34 years, as I said, and I can't imagine not having a disabled person and his family being able to enjoy the same amazing place that I do. So again, I would love to see you support this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Miriam. Any other comments? Anyone else wish to be heard? Just kindly raise your hand before we close this portion of the public hearing. I see Harriet Nezer. Ms. Nezer, I recognize your hand. If you want to unmute your mic, you have the floor.
Hello, Harriet Nezer, 6 Point Road. We're a butter across the way. And while we are in sympathy with a very difficult illness and physical limitations, we feel that the proposed changes far exceed the FAR, and that their requirement or their decision to keep the house as a 2-family house means that there's no way to accommodate the needs, which are easily accommodated on the first floor and can be readily accommodated on the in the houses that exists. And I'd also like to know if this is going to be a permanent, a primary residence.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nezer.
I am Steve Nezer. I'd like just to add.
Yes, please, of course, Mr. Nezer. And I imagine, sir, I presume same address.
It's correct, 6 Point Road.
Thank you, sir.
So a list of building or houses that are 3 stories. It was not clear what the FAR on those buildings are. We know for a fact that one of the buildings that was shown, the 3rd floor cannot be used by the owner of the building. That's the one on Northern Reservation. I'm not sure what that's the story with the rest of the building. But again, I would like to emphasize what Harriet said. It's already, the FAR is twice what it's supposed to be. This is one of the certainly above average size home in Plum Island, and certainly could have been accommodated by using the 2 floors for the living condition of the family, and that will be a nice size home. So that's why we again support very much sentiment, and we certainly want to accommodate the tenant. But there are other ways to do it that will not violate so aggressively the fire guidelines. The other thing is, repeat what Harriet says, is that going to be the prime residence? Because it does make us difference, doesn't it?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Nezzer. And for the benefit of Mr. and Mrs. Nezzer, I wasn't sure if you were here at the very outset. I did describe when comments, public comments are framed in the form of questions, we ask, please don't take any disrespect if we don't answer directly. We adapt them, and you may hear members of the ZBA pose some part or parts or even all of questions that members of the public may have asked in that format. But we wish you to frame it however you feel comfortable. We thank you for your remarks. Let's see. I do not see any additional hands. I'll give it another moment. If there are no additional hands, I will go ahead and close this portion of the public hearing. And we will go to questions from the board. I'll begin with questions from Mr. Ken Swanton. Ken, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. You know, I guess I'd like to start with some of the questions that have come up from some of the abutters. A point was just made by Mr. and Mrs. Nezzer that if this is going to be a primary residence, could the first and second floor accommodate? I guess my first question is, I think Attorney Mead, you mentioned at the beginning, they're about to permanently occupy this space. Have they been living here? Is this about to be a permanent residence? Could you please clear that up?
Yes, I can, Mr. Swanton. It is the permanent residence. It will be the permanent residence, excuse me. They're currently living in temporary housing because they thought that this was going to go a lot faster, given that they started this process. This is not any disrespect to the city. It's been a while. And so they are actually in the middle of moving from one temporary residence to another, and with the hope that this is going to be approved and constructed. And yes, it will be their permanent residence. And as I noted earlier, Ms. Wallace has owned the property since 2007, and they have spent summers out here in the second floor unit, and they rent out the first floor unit. I would remind the board, and perhaps the audience didn't hear, that under the ADA, it is whether or not the requested waivers are reasonable and necessary to afford the handicapped persons an equal opportunity to use and enjoy the housing of their choice. We don't get to choose or make judgments about where people have chosen to, or why they've chosen. This is a two-family pre-existing non-conforming structure. And the first unit is rented. Right now it's not rented, it's empty, but it's being fixed up on the inside to be able to rent it again, and then eventually provide for a rental space for 24/7 care.
They've owned this unit since 2007, so it's been a summer place. So forgive me, I'm just trying to make sure I understand here. So this has been a part-time home, and now it's going to be a full-time home. Is that basically what's happening?
No, so from 2007 to 2013, Robin's mother lived on the second floor. And from 2013 to 2019, Robin, Joseph, and the kids lived in here. And now they have moved out because they want to have it fixed up. And so they're living in temporary housing while they hope to have it fixed up so they can go back here permanently.
Oh, okay, I get it. So they've been here. They're just temporarily elsewhere while they get it fixed up to come back.
Yeah, and I apologize. I misspoke. Robin's mom lived in the first floor from 2007 to 2013.
Okay. I guess the other thing, the question the abutter, Mr. and Mrs. Nesser brought up was they talked about the FAR getting more dense, but I have not seen in my tenure on the board a third floor be added. So I mean, some things are being added here. And they asked a question of why not just use the first and second floor? Could you please address that question?
I certainly can. So there are two different living units. This is a two-family structure. And it has been, it's pre-existing non-conforming. There's a unit on the first floor that gets rented out and is currently, and will it be, when it's rented out again, will be income generating. And the unit that they live in is the second floor.
Can you open that for me?
Can I address one of the other, Mr. Swanton, may I address the issue regarding I just want to point out the street issue.
Well, I was going to get to that, but sure,
Oh,
go ahead. So are you
okay.
going to keep 79th Street clear? That was on my list, but you can.
Yeah,
jump
so
in.
yeah, the answer is yes. So I want to, if you look at this site plan, you can see that from the edge of the house over to 79th Street is 14 point something. I can't quite read that, but it's 14 point something. And if you could go to the next slide down, I think it's slide 3, Caitlin. So here's the My Maps. So if you go, you can see that 79th Street, using the term loosely street, is actually where it is on the ground versus where it actually is. You can see the landscaping that exists in it right there. And so if you go 14 point something feet off the house, that's the property of the applicant. And then there's 79th Street, but everybody can be neighborly, and certainly everybody will do what they can to keep the construction vehicles out of the way. Typically, when work is done out here, I would suspect that folks park up in the parking lot that you can see at the top of the frame there.
So I'm just a little lost. So on 79th Street, you're saying it actually goes through a hedge right now? It's not really a street?
Yeah, so, well, it's a street, but as many streets on the island, as you, I'm sure, have seen, they're not actually laid out where they legally are. So if you could go back to the site plan, Caitlin, one up. So you can see that the applicants have 14 point something off the edge of the house to the property line. And then you can see the hedge line. Caitlin, if you could go bring the cursor down to the bottom of where Northern Boulevard and 79th Street meet, where it says owner applicant. So if you see that dotted line, that's the hedge to the left a little bit, Caitlin, right there. So those areas are the hedge line that's in the street. And you see 79th Street right through there, and you see it out again, the hedge line, and then you see the driveway at the top of it. So this is not an unusual situation on the island, but to be clear, the 14 and some odd feet off of the client's property is their property. 79th Street runs across their property. The traveled path runs across their property, and there are hedges right next to it that are growing in the middle of it.
Okay, so I guess what you're telling me is if you want to travel down 79th Street and not drive through a hedge, you've got to go over their property.
Correct.
All right, but setting that aside, I would assume during, if this goes ahead during construction, you would make an effort to keep 79th Street as clear as it can be.
Absolutely.
All right, getting back to my questions. The second floor, so the applicant is proposing to move back into the second floor. And the second floor, I did not notice a lot of changes. The bathroom seems to be the same size. The bedrooms seem to be the same size. They're all very small. Did I miss something? Are they the same size?
Yes, and I'll turn that over to Kevin. Kevin, Caitlin, if you could go to slide, I think it's probably 5. That's the existing conditions. So go down to 11 maybe. And so I'll let Kevin address that, but the answer is there are not a lot of changes because there's not a lot of room there. But Kevin, go right ahead.
Yeah, the concept here is that, where Joseph would be living, it would be on the 3rd floor, and not much would be changing on the 2nd floor because there really isn't much room to reconfigure that and still accommodate 2 bedrooms and a living area. So the thought was to leave that as it is and make the room upstairs. If you try to reconfigure the 2nd floor to have, there's 2 children, so they need places to live. Then there's Joseph, and then there's Robin. Now, Robin will be with Joseph, but at some point they won't be able to stay together. So this is just to accommodate and keep some sort of same size, and then do all the accommodation on one floor without having to bust this out. And you couldn't accommodate the needs on this floor for a family of 4 with the accessibility issues.
No, that's not gonna help.
And I would add to that, you might see, Mr. Swanton, there's a stairway that goes right up by that second bedroom up to the second floor, which obviously can't go away. The total living space on the 2 floors, the second and proposed 3rd floor, is going to end up being 1,550 square feet. This is not Taj Mahal.
So could you put up the 3rd floor for a sec? So the idea would be the applicant with challenges, this would be their, where their bedroom was. And this is where the wide hallways are and wide access points are. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the 2nd floor isn't changing because even though they've been living on the 2nd floor, that is going to become the kids' floor for as bedrooms.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Swan. If you could go back to the slide 11, you will see that the elevator does open there so that there's outdoor space there on the deck, which is one of the reasons that deck is there.
Right.
And then the living room area
The kitchen, I get it.
is open. Right.
Yeah. All right. I was a little confused by they were in this house and they moved out and then okay. I follow now.
Right. Okay.
You showed some pictures of various buildings with a 3rd story. I had 2 questions on those. One was raised by one of the abutters when they said, well, at least one of those nobody can use that 3rd floor. Do you know whether those 3rd floor pictures you showed are, permitted space, or could they just be attics?
So I would say 2 things. So I haven't been in every single one of those. I happen to have permitted the one on Northern Boulevard. I don't know which number it is. It's not true that it's not living space. It's true that it's not a bedroom, but it's not true that it's not living space. And in fact, a variance was granted by this board, not the current makeup of this board, but by this board to give that space on the 3rd floor. The other ones, as I said, I did honestly say that some of them were pre-existing non-conforming. I was sure other ones may have just, quote, become 3rd floor space. My point was that the configuration that we are proposing is not an unusual site on Plum Island. So I certainly did not pull every single zoning file on every single one of those examples that I gave you. My point was to show that this is not an unusual situation.
Plum Island, of course, includes a lot of Newbury as well as Newburyport. Were all of those examples in Newburyport?
Yes, sir. They were definitely all in Newburyport.
Okay. All right. I have no other questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Mr. Chenin. Mr. Chenin, questions from the board?
Yeah, I just have a couple. I guess the first one, it goes back to some of the discussions that have been had about it being a 2-family, and was consideration given to changing it to a 1-family and using the 1st and 2nd floors? And I guess in conjunction with that, it sounds like the plans down the road is to possibly have live-in assistance on the 1st floor. So if you could comment to that might help answer it as well.
Sure. So initially, that's an income unit, has been an income unit since Robin's mother moved out. And again, it's a pre-existing non-conforming 2-family house. So there wasn't a consideration to change the status or use of the structure. Yes, I did indicate that eventually, and probably sooner rather than later, the point would be to have a 24/7 person live there and have their own independent living space.
All right, thank you. And I guess that just one other question, and it's just curiosity. What are the ages of the children?
4 and 7.
Yeah, that's young. Okay, Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I just have one question for Attorney Mead. As I understand this, Attorney Mead, we are guided in making our deliberations on the ADA test and not the specific zoning requirements. Am I correct? Or maybe if I'm not correct, could you describe the intersection between the ADA and the Fair Housing Amendment Act and our local zoning ordinance?
Sure. And I think that I will probably have your counsel speak to that as well, because I think there may be a difference of opinion. I believe clearly, and we have provided in our filings with the board, that the ADA allows this board to waive, based upon the criteria I presented, the local ordinance related to any local zoning ordinance, both under the ADA and FHA. And so that's why we're here. And quite frankly, there is a split in the court system. Some would say that staff can make that determination on a waiver under the ADA. And there are other courts that say no, the regulatory body can make that determination under the ADA. I've argued in the alternative because I believe that your counsel is going to tell you that you have a right to apply special permit or variance criteria. I suspect, although I don't want to put words in her mouth, with the background that the ADA exists. So our position is that the board is obligated under the ADA to apply the criteria for a waiver and not apply the criteria under the ordinance for a special permit and or variance.
Well, that's an interesting answer. I guess here I'm really struggling with this because it would be not inconsistent in my view to find that the local zoning ordinance requirements have not been yet met, but yet come to the conclusion that your proposed modification would not fundamentally and unreasonably alter the nature and purposes of the zoning ordinance. So how do I
believe
avoid that conundrum?
Well, I can very clearly tell you, in fact, that the ADA says very clearly that it overrides the local zoning ordinance in order to provide a reasonable accommodation if you make the findings that there's disability and that what is being proposed is reasonable and necessary.
Okay, I guess that goes back to my threshold question. When I undertake my analysis, should I be guided by in your opinion, the test set forth in the ADA or the criteria set forth in our zoning ordinance?
I'm going to tell you the ADA.
You're going to tell me the ADA, and what would our counsel to the zoning board say? Are you suggesting they would say something else?
I would let them speak for themselves.
Okay.
Attorney Bennett, I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, would you, this is a good time for me to sort of interject with your permission. We can, while it's fresh in our minds, if you wish, we can ask Attorney Ecker to just offer her opinion and guidance so we can continue to move things forward. Or
that'd be brilliant.
Okay, Attorney Ecker, if you don't mind, I'm not sure if you caught that sort of the framing of that question, but it appears we'd love to get your just your input and guidance on how the board, in your opinion, should govern its deliberations on this point.
Sure. So the ADA does not exempt the applicant from zoning. You still go through the criteria. However, what is required is that you look to see what is being requested is reasonable, and it doesn't have to be all. It's not a zero-sum game, but is reasonable and necessary, as Attorney Mead said, for the applicant to be able to have the use and enjoyment of the property. And then the board also looks to see, as she had also said, whether the modifications that are being requested would fundamentally alter the zoning scheme. And if the board finds that, they can find then that the modification being requested is not reasonable. So it's not that it's being exempted, it's that it's out there and the accommodations are being requested. There's a give or take.
Okay. How's that sit with you, Mr. Bennett?
I heard that explanation and I think I'm satisfied.
Okay, very good. Any other questions before I move on for Mr. Bennett?
No, I don't have anything else.
Very good. I don't have any additional questions that haven't been already addressed, so
Excuse me, I had my hand raised for a long time. I'd really like to speak.
I'm sorry, who's speaking?
This is Robin Wallace, the owner of the property.
Miss Wallace, the owner of the applicant property. Sure.
Yeah, 79th Street.
Sure. I apologize if we overlooked you. Attorney Mead, through you, is Miss Wallace your client?
Sure.
Oh, great. Miss Wallace, our apologies. We always want to have a sort of full and inclusive process.
Sure, I'm sorry. My children are they're very tired. They're trying to go to bed, but so I
You have the
apologize
floor.
for extra noise in the background.
No worries. What would you like to add, ma'am? You certainly have the floor.
I would like to add that I have lived in this house from 2007 till 2019, full time. No bones about it. My mom lived there until 2013. We kept the bottom unit vacant for a while. We have not rented this unit since August of last year because we anticipated renovations, and we kept it vacant because we anticipated already having the renovations and being moved in by now, but due to all this craziness, it has not happened. So anyone to say anything like that, it's insane. There's been no one there in almost 9 or 10 months. You know, everyone here is like pointing fingers. We have one abutter whose house is overhanging our property like by a lot. Should have to take that down. We have another neighbor who has like four rental units and only is licensed for 2, and she's a big proponent of this. You know, it's everybody pointing fingers. I have a dying partner and father of my 4 and 7-year-old children, and you know, it can't work. Nezers, it can't work because when you have a 4 and a 7-year-old, you can't leave your 4 and a 7-year-old on a floor to have them only separated by an elevator, because 4 and 7-year-olds, when they wake up with night terrors in the night, and you should know because you have grandchildren, they can't actually operate an elevator, and you can't expect them to come down. There's also going to be a time when I can't be in the same room with Joseph because he will have 24/7 care, and I need to sleep and I need to take care of my family, and he's going to have to be in a bed by himself. And to the man who took care of his wife for 8 years, you should know this. You should definitely know this. This is real, and you can just Google ALS. You don't need a nurse to tell you this. This is progressive and irreversible, and this is happening. And we're just trying to survive. And so people that want to argue over driveways and a view issue that doesn't exist, you know, more power to you, but like, don't sweat the small stuff, because when it's life or death, it's all small stuff. And I appreciate everyone here who's trying to help, but the people who are trying to hurt, go look at yourself in the mirror, man. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Anything further in questions before we close that portion of the public hearing? Any members of the ZBA or any other questions? Now's the time.
I have a question for our attorney, because I appreciated the answer she gave to Mr. Bennett. This is Ken Swanton. You know, Ms. Eckert, the question of, you know, the question came up earlier of, well, they already have 2 floors. Couldn't they just use the first floor? And I think their response was, well, no, they can rent that out. It's a 2-family house. In an ADA situation like this with a disability, how are we to wrestle with that?
So is your question whether you can force them to use the first floor? Because my answer would be no under
Yeah,
zoning.
That's kind of what I want to get on the record here.
Yeah.
Yes. So could the city say, yeah, I'm sorry, you've got a 2-story house, just use both stories if you need 2 stories. Is that, or is that outside of what the ADA protects in this case?
Well, it's not outside the ADA. That would be outside of zoning, right? It's a 2-family as I understand it. So they're looking to occupy the second floor. There's a first floor income unit as I understand.
But they need 2 floors, so they're asking us to build a 3rd floor essentially. And I think the question came up earlier, why not use the 1st floor? And I just want to, I think it was said, I just want to make sure I understand the way the law works. I'm not a lawyer. And from a disability point of view, is it, I assume the answer we got is correct, that it's a 2-family, it has to stay a 2-family, and if they need 2 floors, they're going to have to add a 3rd floor. They can't just use the 1st floor. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct, unless they wanted to, obviously, right, use the first floor, if they wanted to change it from a 2-family, but as, from what I understand of your question, you're asking whether you can force them or whether it would be, in your decision, reasonable and necessary to build the 3rd floor if they already had the 1st floor. But you can take that 1st floor separate unit into account.
Okay, thank you. That's what I appreciate it, Chairman Ciampetti. So.
Very good. Thank
I
you.
use my time. Thank you.
Any other questions before we close the questions portion of the public hearing and go into deliberations? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead into we're going to close the questions portion and go into deliberations. Before we start with deliberations, I'll just ask if I could, Attorney Eckert, having heard where we are at this stage, I'm just going to give you an opportunity, if you could. Is there anything that we have missed or should address before we move into deliberations? Anything that you wish us to know before we move on to the next increment?
No, I think you've covered it all. I would just, again, emphasize, as you have during this hearing, that nothing be said about what was talked about in the executive session.
Very good. Thank you, Attorney Eckert. Okay, with that and with the benefit of City Council, we are going to now go into deliberations. And again, the application before us is a 3-part application, a variance to allow the creation of a 3rd story. I'm sorry, it's a 2-part application. A variance to allow the creation of a 3rd story and a special permit for non-conformities to allow for an upward and lateral extension of a pre-existing non-conforming structure so as to allow a 3rd floor and added deck area. With those two in mind and with the legal criteria in mind, we'll begin deliberations with Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, this is a challenging one for me. I usually have a very big time, hard time on Plum Island with a house that's already way denser than the FAR standard with a request to make it even more dense. I don't believe I ever voted for a 3rd story. If you have some, maybe they were pre-existing or before my time. So, in generally speaking, I have a hard time with that fragile ecosystem of adding this level of density to it. Having said that, I've had personal, very close issues with disability. My heart goes out to the applicant. I know how your life changes in these situations. And it's unusually tough for me, given my prior stance on Plum Island, of how to deal with this one. And, I hate to, in this situation, do this, but I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say before I weigh in. I don't know if that's legit, but given my personal past with disabilities, I just would like to hear how other people weigh this issue first, if you don't mind, Chairman.
Sure, not at all. We'll just go through and circle back to you, but I'll just say in advance, everyone can't do that after Mr. Swanton. He was the first up, so he has that privilege. We'll circle back to him, but I'll ask everyone to just try to address it as best you can. And with that, Mr. Shannon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we all can't do that. It'll be a do loop. Well, I think in the discussions, the 3-pronged test for the ADA, FHA, I think the first 2 have been met. So I'm comfortable with those. There is an illness, there is a need. The The third one is the one I struggle with, where it might alter any one of our ordinances. And the two that I think Mr. Swanton brought up that give me a pause are the fact that we have a third floor and the FAR density is so grand. It's much larger than we would normally consider. With that said, I guess if I can get over that hurdle and agree that the three-pronged test has been met, we don't even have to address the variance and the special permit. We're basically saying that we can waive those. And I am struggling with that third prong, but hearing the plights of the family and the fact that they've got children and it's a tough situation, I guess right now I'm falling off the fence in favor of waiving, looking at our ordinances and therefore considering the variance and the special permit that the ADA FHA supersedes that. So I guess I'm in support of the application as submitted.
Okay. And Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, my analysis is somewhat similar. I'll start by saying that I am first going to look at the ADA three-part test with some embellishments that I will apply. First test is certainly met. We have an applicant who has a disability. Second, the proposal certainly is reasonably necessary to accommodate the disability. Third, which is somewhat of a gloss that I think is important in this context, is that any options or alternatives relative to maintaining the first floor as a rental unit have been explored to my satisfaction, and I find that the application is among those alternatives the most reasonable alternative to accommodate the disability. Then I'll finally turn to the notion, and which is something which I'm wrestling with, just as I think others are, is this notion of our right to intrude upon the property interests of the applicant here to force them to use the first floor. And I conclude that under the ADA, the applicant has a right to use the property and reside in the property that they wish. So I don't believe, and I guess I think our counsel said this as well, that we can't really implore or force consideration of eliminating the rental unit and using the first floor to make this accommodation under the ADA. And the last test, in my view, is pretty clear. I don't believe in any way the city of Newburyport or the zoning board could make a legitimate finding that this modification would fundamentally and unreasonably alter the nature or purposes of the zoning ordinance. That just is not here, based upon the numerous types of homes and housing that's on Plum Island. So I find all those, I find the test under the ADA has been met. I'm not going to go through because I don't think we need to go through the criteria under our zoning ordinance, and I certainly would approve this. And I think I'll just make a last remark that as we apply and do our job, I think some element of empathy is required here, and this certainly begs out for that sort of thoughtful consideration.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I share the sentiment of my colleagues, and I'll break it down into just the two criteria, the two elements before us with respect to the hardship necessary to be found among the other elements for a variance to allow the creation of a third story. Normally, I have as restrictive, if not certainly equally restrictive or more so restrictive view on impact on Plum Island. I think as a board and historically, we've always treated with great sensitivity impacts that affect this dune resource area for all of the reasons I think we all are well aware. It's tight quarters, to say the least. It's sensitive and shifting sands, both figuratively and literally. And there is very little room for additional impacts. So we take great care and caution when we permit and evaluate any application on the island. That notwithstanding, we must, as a board and as a city and as a citizenship of human beings in the world, I feel we must also run all of that through the prism and lens of being, human beings in the world. I think Mr. Bennett pointed out the notion of empathy. I believe it's within our discretion to evaluate this, but even if it weren't, the ADA does it for us. As a federal statute, it compels all of us in each and every corner of our life and society and culture and law and administration, for better or for worse, to bring to bear these elements of empathy and accommodation when it's appropriate and when it's demonstrated. I feel that it's more than demonstrated here in executive session, all of which is on the record, although much of that has been intimated to very tangentially throughout the open public hearing. So it's really no secret that we're talking about accommodations that require certain space and certain configuration. I think that in light of that, putting the space elsewhere places demands on the lot that are impossible based on the configuration of the lot. And so for me, that's where I find the attachment point for a hardship tied to the size, shape, and configuration of the lot. Maybe perhaps not so much the topography, but perhaps so. You can't plunge a prototypical elevator or create the width necessary for a prototypical staircase when you are seating it on, a built-on grade or otherwise sensitive basement built environment on Plum Island as a barrier beach. So, I'm moved and persuaded by those elements, and I am overwhelmed and persuaded by the very real human piece of this, which is important for us to never lose sight of. So I'm persuaded that the applicant has satisfied the criteria and burdened, although it is, especially sensitive though it is in a place like Plum Island, to meet, for me, the elements necessary to find, to vote favorably on the variance. And as far as the special permit for non-conformities, that is that while a different standard, some might argue a lower standard, I think it's really just a different standard. There are examples, we have now plenty demonstrated to us, some pre-existing, but nonetheless examples of third stories that exist in and around the point and Old Point Road and elsewhere on Plum Island that are adaptive and that exist. So it's not without precedent that this request is being scripted this way to try to exist vertically in the built environment when horizontal growth is not available. We, again, for me, apply the rigor of the ADA. It's not within our power or jurisdiction, and for me personally, not within my, personal capacity as just a human being in the world, for what it's worth, to compel anyone to make it work on a first floor or on another floor or in another way or in another structure. Even if that weren't the case for me personally, I would be remiss to believe that the federal statute of the Americans with Disabilities Act didn't apply to me or my thinking. So I caution myself to not allow myself down that rabbit hole, though it may be something that we are teased and lured into entertaining in our minds. We have to jettison that thinking. That's not something we're permitted to do for a whole host of reasons. So with that, for me, I'm also compelled to find myself able to settle in on this request under these very specific and unique circumstances in light of the very unique and specific requirements. And I would like to think, on a personal note for me, that should it ever be me or someone I care about one day, that I too would never have to find my passion elsewhere due to, aging in place or disability or challenge in all of those regards. So I think that it makes logical, if not moral sense for me personally. I vote purely on the legal and analysis sense, but I share that because, because it's the elephant in the room for me. So my thinking is motivated by those criteria. I believe the applicant satisfied for me the criteria needed. And for all of those reasons, I can also support it. So I don't know if any other member has any other deliberations before I close and we entertain a vote.
Let me just chime back in, Ken Swanton. Sorry about passing. This one hit very close to home.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Mr. Swanton. We didn't circle back to you. My apologies.
Yeah, no, I think I apologize. Thank you, colleagues, for letting me pass. I don't think I've ever done that before, but this one hit very close to home. And I think you guys made compelling arguments. I concur with you. I agree particularly with the chairman here, that I can support the variance and the special permit. And I think we should motion it that way rather than waiving. But anyway, I can support the spirit of letting them go ahead with this because of their very unusual situation. And so I'm fine.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Swanton, and apologies for flying, overflying you on that. Okay, without any further if there's no further deliberations, I will go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing, and I will now move to the vote and entertain a motion to approve by a member with a second, if there is a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, Ken Swanton. I'd like a motion to approve the application for a variance for 479th Street.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Do we have a second?
Mr. Shagnon, I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Shagnon. The motion is made, and actually, we're going to take these one at a time. So, Mr. Swanton, can I presume that your motion to approve is on the variance application request 23-3 to allow the creation of a third story? We'll do that one first.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then Mr. Shagnon, was your second in connection with 22-3, the variance application as well?
It was indeed.
Very good. Motion is made and seconded on the variance application to allow the creation of the third story. I'm calling the roll on the vote. Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
And Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the variance application is approved. Do we have a motion in connection with the special permit for nonconformities to permit an upward extension and lateral extension of a pre-existing non-conforming structure to allow a third floor and added deck area? That's 22-6.
Yes, so moved. You said it well, Ken Swanton.
Thank you,
Mr. Shagnon, I'll second it again.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Motion's made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Did I get that right? Mr. Chagnon, yes. You seconded?
I did.
All right, great. Motion's made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Shannon. Thank you, gentlemen. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes, and that is 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the special permit on 22-6 is also approved. I know it's very late, 9:31, and this is all that we've done so far. So I want to thank members of the ZBA, members of the public who participated. Your participation is critical in our effort to try to do good work as citizen volunteers. No matter what the result, we endeavor to be thorough and be fully disclosed and to hear everyone in every regard. So thank you for your participation. And Attorney Eckert, thank you for your attendance to help guide us through this sort of unique circumstance with an executive session.
You're welcome.
And Attorney Mead, thank you and your clients. I wish you the best of luck. And we will now move on to the next application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, moving on to the next application on our agenda, we have the matter of the application for 7 Oak Street, Barbara Gordon, care of Lisa Mead, Tallerman and Costa LLC. This is a continuation from the hearing of May 24th, 2022. The applicant seeks all necessary approvals to permit seeking a special permit for nonconformities to renovate and construct an addition on a non-conforming single-family home. May we hear from the applicant? And Attorney Mead, I understand that you have Elizabeth Hutton as well as Barbara G. Speaking as well, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 30 Green Street, on behalf of Barbara Gordon, who owns 7 Oak Street. I wish I had Elizabeth Hutton with me this evening, who is the architect or designer on the project. However, she is stuck in an airport somewhere and unable to join us. So you will have to bear with Barbara and I as we hopefully can clearly and cleanly explain and present this project. So we thought it was important to put this rendering up on the slide in the beginning. I think that Mr. Swanton has found these to be helpful in the past. The line drawings are really flat, and so it's difficult to understand the dimensions and the proportions as you look at what's being proposed. And so this goes, we start here, it shows where the proposed addition actually is steps about 18 feet back from the front edge of the existing historic structure. When you look at the line drawings, it looks like it's, of course, dead even with it up on the street, but it's not. And we wanted to show that in this particular slide. So if we go to the first slide after this, the property is again at 7 Oak Street. It's in the R2 and DCOD overlay district. It's a single family home. The home was constructed around 1825, according to the district data sheets, which is also listed as contributory, and in 1850, according to the assessor's records. Interestingly enough, the original assessor's field card doesn't exist for this property, so it was difficult to get some of the older information. In 2016, there was a significant remodeling of the property, and according to the building department records, that remodeling included the removal and replacement of the roof and roof structures on the 1-story additions on the west side of the property, which we're going to see in a little bit. The property includes 43 feet of frontage, where 90 feet is required for a single family home, and includes 2,913 square feet of area, where 10,000 is required. The front yard setback is 2.58 feet, where 25 feet is required. The rear yard setback is 13.46, where 25 feet is required. The right side, that is the historic structure, is 0.21 over, where 10 feet is required. And the left side is at 9 feet 46, where 10 feet is required. The lot coverage is 29.69, where 25% is required. So next slide, please. So the applicant is proposing to remove a portion of the single-story additions and construct a new addition, resulting in demolition of 19% of the exterior walls. Therefore, the DCOD is not triggered. Proposed addition will intensify the lot coverage and left side setback non-conformities and an upward extension of the rear non-conformity. The lot coverage increases from 26.69 to 38.91%. There's a total of 531 square feet being added to the property. Next slide, please. So here's the site plan, and it's a little difficult. Maybe you can blow it up a little bit, Caitlin. But I want to show you the existing foundation. So if you start at the rear of the property, you can see the little arrows that say existing foundation to remain. So that's the addition that exists today. And then you can see in the middle of where the new addition is proposed, the existing foundation areas to be removed. And then the new foundation wall comes up to where it says proposed concrete foundations, and then it goes over and connects to the existing structure. I want to point out in this slide, because it was a bit of a conundrum for the designer and for the engineer, you'll see that rear wall is actually not plumb with the rear line in the back, the rear yard line. And as a result, as the side of the new structure moves forward to the front of the lot, it gets a little bit closer to the front because it is coming straight off of the rear existing foundation. So you can see it gets a little more narrow to 9 feet at the front. And I just wanted to point it out that it was a result of the existing condition of the rear foundation wall. Next slide, please. And so this is the existing structure. I'm going to start with the right side elevation on the bottom. That is the side that faces the neighbor that's a little bit over. You can see nothing's happening to that side. The left side elevation at the bottom, you can see where the portions of the existing one-story structure is being removed and the wall of the historic structure is being removed in order to make way for the new addition. There you can see the front elevation right above, where obviously the historic structure stays intact, and the front walls and roof of the existing additions are removed. And then the rear elevation, you can see that on the rear elevation, the only changes to that rear wall, in addition to it going up, obviously, is there's a change in location of the existing slider in the back and the windows. But that does show what's being removed, and it's lower than 25%. Next slide, please. So what we have here, and this is why I said earlier that that the rendering was important, because you could actually see how this all fits on the lot. So you can see the front elevation. There's a small L being added. The two single-story additions are turning into a two-story addition with a little entry in the middle. And if you go down to the elevation, the side elevation at the bottom, you can see that the proposed new addition, the little L, does not come in front of the main entry to the house, which you will still be able to see the historic house, coming down the street. And then you can see there's the addition that's being added on the back, two-story addition on the back, with the a bit of a shed dormer, I think, that dives into the existing roof line of the historic structure. Next slide, please. And then here's the rear elevation. Again, you can see the new two-story structure that's in the same footprint of the rear of the foundation of the existing single-story structure. There's a little deck on the second floor over the French windows, French doors, the little outdoor space off the master bedroom on the second floor. And then there's nothing that happens on the right side elevation, and you can see actually there are no windows on that side of the house. So we're here for a next slide, please. The proposed materials also the materials are to be in keeping with the existing historic home. They're wood clapboards to have the same reveal as the existing, the matching corner boards and cedar shakes on the gable ends to complement the existing structures. All these notes, by the way, are on the elevations. Simulated divided light windows with 3D muttons and interior spacer bars, aluminum clad with wood exposure on the interior. So all high quality, high finishes are going to be placed upon the addition to make it appropriate to match the existing historic structure. I'll go to the next slide, which is a photograph of the existing structure. So you can see where the additions are coming off and then the new addition being added. Next slide, please. And that's the current addition right there. That has been, the roof line and everything has all been replaced. Next slide, please. And then obviously a closer picture of the existing structure. And next slide. And so here's the rendering. Let's just stop here for a second. Oh, actually, I should go to the mind map. So the rendering we went over at the beginning, but you can see how it's stepped apart from and exposes the historic structure so as not to detract from it. Next slide, please. Here's Oak Street. So you can see where the house is, 2929. And there are certainly on the opposite side of the street, there are some pretty significantly sized houses. But similarly, the house right next door to this is of good size, and on down Oak Street as well. But I just wanted you to see how it fits in the neighborhood. Next slide, please. This is a little better. The two houses, 7 and 9, are right next to one another, so they're pretty close. But they are. This proposed house is certainly not going to be out of keeping from the rest of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So the criteria for a special permit for nonconformities, first is that there is no new nonconformity in here. We are not creating a new nonconformity. And the second is the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. Based upon the proposal, we think the board can find that the addition is not substantially more detrimental than the existing structure to the neighborhood. The proposed addition starts with the same footprint on the rear as the existing addition and then carries that footprint forward. Because the existing footprint is not square, as I pointed out earlier, there's a slight intensification of that left side setback from 9.46 to 9 as it runs towards Oak Street. The existing additions, while smaller in height and overall size, are not of an appropriate architectural design, given the age and design and style of this historic structure. The portion of the walls of the existing structure that are being removed, they're only a portion of them and not all of them. The proposed addition is set back from the historic structure and from the street. It's 22.8 feet from the street, whereas the existing historic structure is 2.58 from the street. As I said, it's another 18 feet back from the front of the historic structure, just to give you an idea of the depth. The proposal includes a gable end, which complements and is consistent with the existing historic structure, albeit a little further away. And when looking at the structure from Oak Street, the prominent and closest structure will be the historic structure, and further into the lot will be the new addition. Also, the roof connecting the new with the old overlays on the old so as to preserve the historic roof line of the existing, and then provides a connection between the new and the old. The mean height of the structure remains at 17.6, well below the permitted 35 feet. Care was taken to continue to allow those traveling east on Oak Street, we'll see this in a minute, to continue to see the main entrance of the historic structure, as you can see with the center entry. And the existing living space of the home is 1,238 square feet. The addition will result in living space of 1,769. In comparison, the surrounding homes include an average of 2,386 square feet for single-family homes, the length of Oak Street. Therefore, the proposal is certainly not out of character or certainly not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure. And as I said earlier, all high-end finishes will be used to complement the existing structure. And then if I could just go on to slide 15, 16. So this is looking down the street. This is kind of a far view, but you can see it down on the left-hand side. With the house right next door is much taller and has a little bay window, I think, out the front of it. Next slide, please. Here it is. You can see on the left-hand side of this thing, just beyond the tree, you can see the house, and then the house immediately next door, which of course is taller and does have that bay window. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to provide some shots of the houses along Oak Street that tend to be a little broader on the street, except for maybe that one on the right initially. Whereas this is more narrow in the street and the addition will be set towards the back. Next slide, please. And this is just another view down Oak Street to give you an idea of the general tenor of the street. We have also provided letters from 7 of the abutters and neighbors on Oak Street to the board. All of the surrounding houses, 3, 5, 8, 9, that's the one that's right next door on both sides, 10 Oak Street and 13 Oak Street. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions from the board.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead, for walking us through that. We'll now go to public comment, and we can see the public comment card that is up. Anyone who is attending who wishes to speak in connection with the application, just please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. Let's see, seeing no hands going once, going twice. I will close that portion of the public hearing and we'll go into questions from the board, and we'll begin with Mr. Swanton.
Okay, thank you. First off, you're right. I like your rendering, the first slide there. I think it was very helpful to visualize what's happening here. I think it was very helpful rendering. I just have one question. It's on slide 4. If you could just blow up the zoning little table in the bottom corner there. I think you explained quite well what happened with the side lot setback and the fact the lot's a little crooked. My question's about the lot coverage. It's going from a little under 30 to 38.9. Is there anything? I realize a lot of that's happening because there's a bigger footprint. I get that. Is there anything that can be done to reduce the coverage, or is that strictly a function of the footprint?
Well, it's certainly a function of the footprint, because that it's anything under a roof basically is the lot coverage, Mr. Swanton. We're only adding 531 square feet in total here. And a lot of the driver on the size of the addition had to do with not wanting to interrupt the roof line of the existing historic structure and being able to get a staircase in the back to service both without hitting your head on the beams. So there was a little bit of pushing and pulling in order to do that. And I don't know if that explains it or not, but it's certainly a function of the footprint.
Okay, thank you. Really, you addressed everything else, and thank you very much. I have no other questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swanton. Let's see, we'll go to Mr. Shannon.
Chair, I've got no questions. A very thorough presentation. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Benick.
I have no questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Benick. I don't either. I think it's a thorough, and I appreciate thorough applications that seem pretty clear. All right, I will close that portion of the public hearing, and we'll just move into deliberations. Again, we're deliberating around the applicant's request, which is a special permit for non-conformities to renovate and construct an addition on a non-conforming single-family home. Deliberating around the criteria of special permit, we'll start with Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I think, well, there are no new non-conformities in this proposal. And in general, I do not see this as being substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming structure. I think it blends in well with the neighborhood. I'm familiar with Oak Street. I walk down it quite often. And I think it fits in to the neighborhood. So I can support this application.
Very good. Mr. Chen.
Thank you, Chair. I have to agree with Mr. Swanton. I think the addition is modest, and I appreciate the care that was taken to maintain, the appearance of the existing home. It is a nice looking home. Keeping that center doorway visible from the street, I think was clever. And as I said, I think the addition is not more detrimental to the neighborhood. The only thing we could pick on was going from a side lot setback of 9.4 to 9 feet. Hopefully we don't get down into the inches like that. But I can support this excellent presentation, and I really do like the design.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Shannon. And Mr. Benick.
I would agree. It's a thoughtful presentation, modest increase in size, consistent with the neighborhood, and certainly not more detrimental, and in fact enhances the neighborhood. I'm in favor of this application.
All right, thank you, Mr. Benick. I agree. I feel the application was very clear. It satisfies the criteria for special permits as well. So I concur with my colleagues. We'll close, unless there's anything else, we'll close deliberations and move this matter to a vote. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion. Ken Swanton, I move we approve the application for special permit for nonconformities for 7 Oak Street, which is number 22-15.
Very good. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Benick. Motion is made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Benick on the special permit for nonconformities. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Benick.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries, and the application is approved. Thank you very much, ZBA, and thank you, Attorney Mead, and your. We wish you the best of luck with your client.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Moving on to the next application. This is the matter of George Croteau. And my apologies. Is it Croteau? I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. 173 Northern Boulevard, a special permit for nonconformities to construct an upward extension of a non-conforming accessory structure and to create additional living space. And on this application, I believe we have Mr. Crotow from Design Build, as well as Lee McGovern and Everett Chandler, the surveyor, along with the owner, Kevin Dalton, who may also be present. Who wishes to speak and present the application?
I will. Hi, I'm George Croto.
Croto.
Croto, yes.
Thank
I'm
you,
a
sir.
licensed contractor in Massachusetts. I represent Kevin Dalton for the proposed upward addition on his garage at 173 Northern Boulevard, Plum Island. On that piece of property, we have two buildings. Building 1 is the main building. Building 2 is a freestanding garage, measures approximately 17.3 by 19.3. We need to go up because he has 7 children and he needs a place to keep them besides the main house. So what we're planning to do is go up. By going up, we're gonna remove the roof. When you go up into the attic now, there is about a 3-foot knee wall on both sides. So with this gonna lift the walls front and back 4 feet, and we're gonna lift the building up 4 feet. The height of the ridge pole is never proposed. An existing height of the existing garage will stay the same. We're gonna add 5 windows on different sides. A half bath would consist of a bathroom, toilet, sink, small hot water heater, about a 3-gallon hot water heater, so they have warm water to wash their hands. And it's going to be an open space. And we're going to put a new garage door, overhead garage door down on the first floor. Let's see, where are we here? All right, so all right, so Caitlin just moved this. So this is the proposed rendering of the structure. So if you look at the outside corner nearest to you, going up along that door at the bottom of the stairs, you see a facial rake board coming down. What we're planning to do is add what you see there above where that window is. That's all we're doing, is we're just lifting up the roof. Actually, we have to rip the roof off, but basically that's what we're doing. As you could see that. If you go down to the next slide, Caitlin. Okay, so the only thing that's changing here on the existing to the proposed is existing right now, we have a walk-up stairway that's in the garage area. Once this is built, of course, we're going to remove that, and we're going to place a landing on the second floor going with a set of stairs going down to the ground level. The stairs are going to be put on helical piles so we don't disturb any grass. We've already been through that with the Conservation Committee. Okay, Caitlin, could we go down the next? All right, so here we have it. We're calling it a guest room. When this first started, we had it as a hangout room. So the first 3 or 4 renderings was a hangout room. So this got changed to a guest room, and I don't know why we did that, but it's just for his children. So here's a better view of what we're planning to do. Here is the proposed elevations. As you can see, nothing's changed between existing and on the next page, you'll see proposed, the same heights. So we're not going up any further with the existing building. We're just bringing up the front and back walls, approximately 4 feet. Next, Caitlin. Yeah, here we go again. So you could see what's going on here. It's pretty basic. There's really not much to talk about here. As like I said, it's a small room, approximately 17 by 19. We probably all have bedrooms bigger than that. So once we put the bathroom in, the bathroom takes about 25 square feet. So that's going to be minus what we're looking at there, which is approximately 360 square feet. Okay, down, Caitlin, please. All right, so there is the sectional, as you could see, showing the helical piles. It's pretty cut and dry. I don't know. I entertain some questions.
Was that the extent of the presentation? Was there anything else you wanted to add? Or?
Well, it is right now, yes.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. We will then close that portion of the public hearing and go to the public comment section. Anyone who wishes to speak in connection with the application, just please raise your hand and we will recognize you. Seeing only 10 people in the room, I do not see any hands going once, going twice. All right, I will close the public comment section and go right into questions from the board. We'll begin with Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. It's pretty straightforward. You're putting a room above the garage. We always look at FAR on these Plum Island ones, and I think I found it in your materials. It goes from 20 today to 21. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So that's well within our standard of our limit of 25. The other thing is, you mentioned this is for the kids. So the idea is this is not going to be a separate dwelling unit or a so-called short-term rental unit, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they have 7 children, and I guess when they're all together in the summer, it gets a little hectic in the house. So I guess some of them could go over to this area and kind of chill out, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get it. I guess, I think in your situation, that would not be the case, but who knows? They could sell this house and down the road, somebody else could have it. I just think it's important that this not be a separate dwelling unit. We all understand that, and that it's not going to be for rental. So I just wanted to double check that that's not the intent here.
That's not the intent. We don't show a kitchen going in, and we don't have a full bath, and that's not his intention. Believe me, I've talked with him enough. He just got to get the kids out of the main house.
Yeah, no, I get the reason for that. It was particularly with 7 of them. I only had 3. I just think as part of our decision, if we approve this, we need to stipulate that, just since it's a separate building. But anyway, so I have no other questions. You are very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Moving now to Mr. Channon.
I've got no other questions. Good presentation, pretty straightforward. I understand what they're trying to do, so I don't have any questions for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Channon. Mr. Bennett, any questions for you?
No, it's quite clear. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. None for me either. We'll close that portion of the public hearing and go into deliberations using the governing ourselves around the criteria for a special permit for nonconformities. We'll begin with Mr. Swanton. You want to kick things off for us?
Sure. I see no new nonconformities created here. It's a rather modest change just to raise the roof of the garage for a room, particularly when there's, it doesn't move the needle on the FAR much at all. So I don't think this is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing structure. So I can support this as long as we're clear that this is not going to be, a separate dwelling unit or a rental unit. So with that, I can support this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Channon.
I agree with Mr. Swanton. I think it meets the criteria for a special permit, and I can support the application.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett.
I will echo those observations and agree wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I too concur. I think the applicant satisfied the criteria for a special permit as well. And thank you for the sort of sharp delivery of your application. It was very clear. and that's appreciated. So we'll close that portion of the public hearing and entertain a motion to approve. Do we have a motion and a
I'll-
second?
I'll make a motion, Ken Swanton. I move that we approve a special permit for nonconformities for the application for 173 Northern Boulevard, which is number 22-16, with the condition that the accessory structure shall not be considered a separate dwelling unit, nor used as a so-called short-term rental unit.
Good. Do we have a second?
Mr. Shagnon, I'll second that.
Very good. Thank you. Motion's made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Shagnon. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shagnon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
and Rob Champetti. I vote yes. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries and the application's approved. Thank you very much and good luck. Good luck with the project. Moving now to 427 Merrimack Street. This is the application by John M. Guilfoyle, 427 Merrimack Street, a special permit for nonconformities to add living space in a single-car garage to the side of a pre-existing non-conforming single-family unit, extending the non-conforming rear yard setback. And presenting the application is the applicant himself, Mr. John Guilfoyle. Mr. Guilfoyle, you have the floor.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for your time. Can everyone hear me? I thought that the camera was on, but
We
the
can hear you.
iPad is. You can good. The iPad's eluding me, but you're not missing much. I'm just in my basement, so all you'll be seeing would be a water heater behind me. So thank you for your time this evening. I recently purchased 427 Merrimack Street at the beginning of the year. It is a unique property in that it was previously being used in a non-conforming way. It previously housed a open to the public beauty salon, a barbershop, basically a hairdresser on the first floor. And completely separated from that was essentially a rental apartment on the second floor. In doing my due diligence before I bought this property, it was made very clear to me that that was not a legal or conforming use of the property, and that the city considered this to be a single family house. So I purchased the house with the intention of renovating it to move into it. And we've gotten into that process. So we have the first slide here. Actually, the first slide was just, I think, a satellite picture. We're on the second slide, which is the survey or plot that we had done by Mr. Dixon. And it shows essentially where the building is now, a small kind of square-shaped house, 2-story, that we are currently renovating to be a 3-bed, 3-bath, which you'll see in the plans below. Then you'll see in red that we have proposed to add essentially a mudroom and a single-car garage. And I want to kind of give the backstory for that. This building was used for commercial purposes for what I can tell a long time, several decades, going back to the middle of the 20th century. And I know in buying the property that is not the desired or even allowed use of that. So for me, this is a project to turn this 1960s house into a modern house that a family, or my family in this case, will live in. And not to be renting out portions of or running a business out of. And as part of the original building permit that we have applied for and obtained for the interior renovations, we've made it clear to the city that we are reverting this back to the allowed use, which is a single family house. What that leaves us with, however, are all of the sort of scars or remnants of the commercial use of the building. We have a 7 or 8 car parking lot right now instead of a driveway and any semblance of a yard. So it's pretty much blacktop for the entire, what would be the front yard and side yard of the house with a small retaining wall. What I am proposing to do, and I'm here as the person who is doing the project and doing what I'm qualified to do, which is mostly bringing things to the dumpster. I'm seeking to turn this more into a Newburyport, New England house. And I think that the two main things missing from the house that we're renovating is the mud room, the place to take off your shoes, maybe do your laundry, have your closet, in the weather elements, which we have all 4 seasons, and then the garage, the indoor shelter for a vehicle that is badly needed in much of New England. If we can go to the next slide, you'll see kind of what we are doing to the house. This next slide here shows both stories, and what we're actually, this is what we're actually doing right now, absent the mudroom and garage that we're here to talk about. This first floor was a completely open salon. What we had determined was that they had essentially compromised some of the structure by opening that wall, which would be the dining room and living room. The two rooms on the left were where people got their hair cut. But in cutting down a load-bearing wall there, they had allowed the building to sag several inches. So we have already done significant work. We put a new beam in place with posts above and a new ollie column in the basement. And we have completely gutted this house because that's what it's going to take for it to be turned into a livable single-family house. So we've done significant improvements already. We're getting into the point where utilities are almost done. And then to the left, to the right, you're right, you will see the second floor layout. And you'll see that there are significant changes to the second floor layout. That is because we had to, throughout going through this process, completely redo both staircases. It was determined that the staircase to the basement and staircase to the second floor, given their age, given the way things were done back then, maybe should never have been done that way. Neither staircase met code in multiple different ways. So we were forced to build two brand new staircases, which we have done to bring the building up to spec. Again, as you can see though, on that first floor, that leaves us with no storage, no closets of any kind, no coat closet. You're just coming into the house and you're in your kitchen or in your dining room. It's more of an apartment feel at that point. So what we're left with while doing all this work is this 1,500 or so square foot house that will be totally redone on the inside, but then with a 7 or 8 car, depending on how you look at it, parking lot, blacktop, asphalt parking lot outside the house. And I don't believe that it's in the spirit of the neighborhood, the city, or in New England houses to have a 8-car parking lot in your 1,500 square foot house. So we go to the next slide, you'll see what we're proposing that it would look like. I understand this is an existing non-conforming structure, and that by adding a garage, we are seeking the city's relief and permission to go back 3 additional feet on the rear setback, which is the setback that we're not currently meeting. The rationale for that is that it will give us a garage that will fit a car and a driveway that will fit a car in front of it without going onto the street. So what we're trying to do there is allow 2 cars from a family to park reasonably comfortably in a more of a driveway setting with a garage, as opposed to what it is now, which is again the big open parking lot. So what we're trying to do is create a house that more fits the neighborhood. I've walked, driven, and Google mapped the neighborhood extensively since buying and before buying the house, and I believe that what we've designed will fit the spirit and the similarities of the other houses in the neighborhood. This is a neighborhood where there have been houses that have been added onto over the years that have built out a significant portion of their lot. They've been improved upon. These are houses that people have lived in and taken good care of, and we're seeking to create the same here. We're re-siding the house. We're replacing all the windows. We're replacing the roof. We're doing a lot to make this really kind of rundown storefront, illegal kind of bootleg storefront, back into a house. And the aid that I'm seeking is to be able to build this mudroom and garage to replace that parking lot with something that's a little more homey. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this is the way I bought the house. The basement is it's a cinder block basement. It's got a sub pump, so we're not planning on using that. There was a bathroom in the basement that was not to code, and I'm not sure anything was ever pulled for that. We've removed that entirely because it wasn't done right. So we have our basement. But the existing first and second floor give you an idea of what we walked into when the purchase was made. There was this wide open salon space. On the right, there was a hair washing station, and there was a load-bearing wall cut out to open up that salon space. And then of note, there were walls put up to completely separate the salon space from all the way on the right there, the apartment, 2-bedroom with a living room apartment that was presumably being either lived in or rented out at some point. So what we've done is essentially gutted the house at this point to return it to its proper use. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the more elevations there. I'll give you a sense of what we're looking at with the house now. That's just what the house looks like now. The next slide is just the application I filled out. I apologize for any typos in there. I'm doing this myself. But essentially what we want to do is create a house that we can move into and be proud of, that has the same amenities that the other houses in Newburyport would have. And right now there are 3 parking spaces directly in front of the front door and another 4 or 5 on the side of the house. We would like to get rid of all those parking spaces at the front door, remove the sort of deck landing that was more for the customers of the business, put a traditional stone staircase, 3-stair precast or stone up to the front door, and put grass and plantings and get rid of the asphalt and make it more of a front lawn or front yard with our mudroom and garage. And then to be determined landscaping to the right of that, certainly not asphalt or any more asphalt anyway. So that is what we're seeking to do. The major relief we're asking for with this is that we are increasing a pre-existing non-conforming building by adding an additional 3 feet to the rear. But once again, that is the geometry it would take to accommodate a car in the garage with a car in front of it, and sort of reconfigure that commercial style parking lot into a residential driveway. And I would be happy to take your questions or feedback at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Guilfoyle. We certainly will circle back with any questions, but with that, we will close that portion of the public hearing. Invite any public comment. Anyone who wishes to speak in connection, raise your hand and make yourself known, and you shall be heard. Not seeing any hands raised, going once, going twice, closing that portion of the public hearing. Now going to questions from the board. We'll start with Mr. Swanton.
Now I'm unmuted. Caitlin, could you put up the site plan? The one that shows, I'm sorry, the one that shows what he wants to build. I guess, is that on there?
It's in red. It's sort of, yeah.
Oh yeah, I get it. Okay. So as you said at the end, the primary relief you're looking for is that 17-foot number back there. And I understand a garage needs to be 14 feet wide, or it should be, to easily get a car in and out of. Did you ever consider making your mudroom a little different so you didn't need to go back quite so far?
So I was relying on Mr. DiBiaso as the architect for this. I don't feel qualified to sort of question what he had laid out. I believe in talking to him that there's a lot of space on the right side of the building. The building is very much over to the left, where I think there's only 1 foot of additional, it meets, but only by a foot on that setback. So I think the idea was that there was a lot of space on the right, and that a mudroom would add value and storage, and we wouldn't have to do our laundry in a damp basement. It would sort of give us a significant benefit while removing an eyesore, which is that parking lot from the neighborhood. So I believe that was the rationale of the architect in presenting this.
Okay. By the way, I think you're making a very nice overall improvement. So I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Let's see, Mr. Chenin.
I guess I'm gonna go use the same drawing again. So the rear setback is 17 feet, and is the right side yard setback also 17? Am I reading that correctly?
The right, so the side B setback, we currently have 39.7 feet. The required dimensional control is 10 feet. We would be left with 17 feet when we finish on the right. So we would still have 7 feet of clearance on the right after building the structure.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got no other questions.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. We are at Mr. Bennett.
I'm good, no questions.
All right, I don't have any questions either. We'll just go into deliberating the special permit for non-conformities. And again, we'll go to the top of the batting order here, and we'll start with Mr. Swanton.
Now I know how Mr. Moore feels. I think I can support this. There are no new non-conformities, and I think it's certainly not more detrimental. It's an improvement over what was there. So I can support this.
All right, Mr. Shannon.
I have to agree with Mr. Swanton, and again, thank you for going first, Mr. Swanton. My only trepidation was the reduction in the rear yard setback, but I find it acceptable. I don't think it's crazy out of line. And as Mr. Swanton said, I think it is an improvement to the neighborhood, and kudos to the owner for taking this on and changing it back into a nice residential home. So I can support it.
Very good, Mr. Shannon and Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I can support the application. A 3-foot reduction in the setback is not inconsequential. However, overall, this project has much to support it, reverting back to the proper use, eliminating what I would characterize would be a asphalt eyesore in front of the house, and turning that into a properly grassed front yard, and the overall improvement to the structure all lead me to support this and find that it's a positive benefit to the neighborhood.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I agree. I don't have anything further to add other than to thank you, Mr. Guilfoyle, for taking on this project and endeavoring to do a good job and kind of reconfigure things here. And it's an adaptive reuse of a curious previous use. So I think it certainly is going to be better and more cohesive based on what you're designing. So thank you for that. I support it as well. Any other deliberations before we call for a vote? Hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve?
I will make a motion to approve. This is Ken Swanton. I move we approve the application for a special permit for nonconformities for 427 Merrimack Street, which is application 22-17.
Very good. Do we have a second?
I will second the motion.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. Motion's made and seconded. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the application is approved. Mr. Guilfoyle, thank you for your patience this evening and waiting so long to be heard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I greatly appreciate it.
Yep. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you.
The last application that is on our agenda this evening is the application for 257, 259 Water Street. It's a special permit for nonconformities to construct the addition of a rear, construct addition to the rear of an existing nonconforming structure footprint consisting of an upward extension. This is the application of Arthur and Sandy Manley, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa. Attorney Mead, you have the floor.
There we go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Lisa Mead, Kellerman, and Costa. On behalf of Arthur, we call him Bud Manley, and Sandy Manley. And with me this evening is also Scott Brown, who is the architect on the project. This is for 257 to 259 Water Street. Next slide, please. So the property, this is a special permit for nonconformities, as the chair suggested. And actually, we're not putting an addition on the rear. It's actually, we're just changing the roof line in the rear, which you will see in a little bit, which constitutes an upward extension. When you see the property in a minute, you'll say, well, why is that an upward extension? This is a pretty good sized lot, except for that if you are located in the Ag Con district, it is not a good sized lot. And there are a number of properties on the northerly side of Water Street that are in the Agricultural Conservation District. This is also in the Demolition Control Overlay District and in the Floodplain Overlay District. It currently has a 2-family home on the property. According to the assessor's records, the structure was constructed around 1898. However, according to the district data sheets, they say it was constructed around 1875. The structure is listed as contributory on the district data sheets. The 2-family use on the property is pre-existing non-conforming. Under the 1978 ordinance, the property was zoned as an R2, and 2-family uses were permitted as of right at that time. well, it's not sure, well, we're not sure when exactly the two-family use came into effect. It certainly did exist as of 1960, according to the assessor's field card. The property is and structure are pre-existing non-conforming. The AgCon district requires a 400,000 square foot lot. The property is 7,410. The minimum required frontage is 300 feet. The property has 78. The maximum allowable lot coverage is 3%. The lot coverage on the property is 21.5%. The structure therefore also is non-conforming for all setbacks under the AgCon district, where 50 feet are required, are required. The right side setback is 26.4 and the left is 9.5. The front setback is 6.5 and the rear setback is 38.7. The structure's height is 28.6 and the maximum 30 feet is allowed in the AgCon district. Next slide, please. So the proposal is to convert this two-family into a single family and renovate the existing structure. As I said earlier, there's going to be a slight upward extension of the right side setback and rear yard setback nonconformities. However, the footprint of the structure will not be changing. Because we are removing the attached shed in the back, which you'll see in a minute, and the side porch, the lot coverage calculation will improve from 21.5% to 19.9%. We'll show you the deck is also, the westerly deck is also being removed. And I would add that the mechanical equipment, because it's in the floodplain district, is all being moved above the floodplain onto the second floor. We did have to go see the Historic Commission because of the roof line change in the rear. But in addition to that, because it's in the floodplain district, and some of you have heard these cases before, because a substantial improvement in the floodplain district is considered to be anything that equals or exceeds 50% of the value of the structure, in order to make the improvements without raising it on pilings, we had to have the Historic Commission declare that the property was in fact historical, and that even after the renovations, it would continue to retain its historic nature. The Historic Commission has so made such a determination already on this project. So the next slide, please. So here's the property. On the left side, you'll see the existing conditions. And you can see actually for the Joppa area, it's a pretty good size lot. And many of you may recognize it as you drive by it. On the right side, you can see where the changes are going to be made. So you can see that there is going to be a removal of that shed that's added in the back. If you could blow up a little bit, maybe that right side. There we go. So that attached shed that you can see in the red is going to be removed. Also, the deck on the westerly side is being removed, and the existing porch on the westerly side is going to be removed. Also, out by the seawall, there's a built-in bench that is being removed. So the Manleys are taking care to really clean up the structure and remove a lot of the kind of peripheral structures that aren't adding anything to the property, and certainly by doing so, we'll be improving the area for the floodplain district. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to go over the specifics of the renovations which are being undertaken.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Could we go to the next slide, please, Kate? Thank you. So this is a late Victorian 2-unit house. It's split right down the middle. And as Lisa already mentioned, we're converting this to a single family. Most of the structural changes that we're making are on the rear of the property. The house is currently covered in vinyl siding, which we are replacing. And we are replacing it with a combination of cedar clapboard and white cedar sidewall shingles. There are also a number of vinyl replacement windows, which we are swapping out for a higher quality product. We're also reworking a number of the details, including the eave lines, with the goal of trying to sort of bring this back closer to what it once was. The overall goal here is to really bring up the overall quality of the home. So for comparison purposes, all of the next floor sheets, which I'll walk you through, have the existing elevations on the top and the proposed elevations on the bottom. So on this sheet, what we're looking at here is the front elevation of the house as you would see it from Water Street. And at a glance, you can see that we're not really, on the front of the house, we're not really making a lot of changes. You will note that we are moving the outer 2 windows on each side of the house a little bit closer to the corners. This is in large part to some of the things that we want to do inside. But one of the members of the Historic Commission did note that it actually sort of improves the balance of the elevation somewhat. Off to the right there, bubbled in red, located beyond, we're adding in a new porch roof above the existing entry. And this is going to be the main entry to the home. And beyond that, there are some later additions to the house, and you can begin to sort of get a look at some of the things that we are planning to do with the roof line. Next slide, please. So this is the right side elevation or east elevation. Starting at the top, we're adding a bunch of skylights to the roof of this house. This is a bit of a compromise. This project first started out with a shed dormer, but the Historic Commission didn't like that very much. So these skylights are really important to activating the space, what is going to be a finished space at the 3rd floor. And again, directly below that, bubbled in red, that's our new front entry portico. We're essentially putting a pair of columns and a roof over an existing entry porch. Off to the right there, these are later additions, not original to the Victorian structure. And again, you can start to get a sense in terms of what we're doing with the roof lines there. We're switching the siding in the back because it's always nice to sort of differentiate the original box from the later additions. And this is an opportunity to do that. And also we're changing the fenestration on the back really to try to, in an effort to kind of make it more congruent with the front of the house. Next slide, please. So this is the rear elevation, as you would see it from the water. And you can see in the top, one of our big goals of this project was to sort of really clean up these ugly sort of out of place roof lines, and also to really clean up the fenestration on the back of the house. So in the bottom, I really think that we've done a nice job of cleaning up those roof lines, cleaning up the fenestration, opening up the back of the house to what is going to be a great view. And, this change, as Lisa already mentioned, this change in the roof lines is what triggers the upward extension request. Next slide, please. Coming full circle, this is the left side of the house facing west. At the top, you can see those 2 decks that Lisa mentioned that we're removing. 2 entry doors, which are, to the existing unit that's on the left side. Those are both being removed. The one there in the center is being removed and replaced with the window. And you can begin to see in the existing elevation on the top, off to the left there, that is the enclosed, with that low slope roof, that is that enclosed shed structure that we are planning to remove. Next slide, please. So this is our DCOD calculation sheet. So which is nice at a glance. It kind of gives everyone an idea of where we're doing the majority of the work. The maroon areas indicate, those places that we're making structural changes. Bottom left, that's our rear elevation. And you can see the difference, you can actually begin to see where we need, where we're adding volume, which triggers this request for an upward extension. Next slide, please. Just an aerial view from the city mapping system. Next view, next slide. This is looking down Water Street towards Plum Island. Next slide. Close up, those are the 2 decks that we're removing off to the left there and back. It's the existing enclosed shed area that we're removing. Off to the right there, that is the door that we're removing and replacing it with a window. Next slide. Looking up Water Street towards downtown. Next slide. A little bit of a closer view. And again, on the right side, that's going to be the main entrance to the house. And this is where we're proposing that new porch roof. And with that, I will hand it back to Attorney Mead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. And so as the board knows, under section 9, the criteria is whether or not there is a new or additional nonconformity, and the answer is there is not here. The next criteria is whether the proposed changes will be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing. Here, we believe that the renovations and reshaping and reconstructing the rear addition roof while constituting a roof line change is a very modest change and will actually provide more exposure to the north gable end of the main part of the original structure. We're not changing any proposed, we're not proposing to change any of the footprint. Again, the applicant is removing the attached shed in the rear of the structure and will be removing an encroaching side porch and entry from the west side of the structure. Many of the fenestrations are being changed to improve the quality and the view and architectural style of the home to be more in keeping with the original architectural style. The change in the roof line in the rear is imperceptible from the street. The proposed changes don't add any additional footprint, as I said, but in fact, because of the removal of part of the structures, we improve the lot coverage from 21.5 to 19.9%. And certainly while it's beyond the purview of this board, it's important that the mechanical systems are being removed from the floodplain and being constructed above within the structure. Finally, the renovated structure is in keeping with the Joppa Historic District and the original design of the home. And we believe with that, the board can find that the proposed changes are not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming structure. And I would be remiss in saying we're also changing the density from a 2 to a 1, which will make it a less intense use on Water Street.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. Was there anything else?
That's it, thank you.
All right, great. We'll close that portion of the public hearing, go to public comment. Anyone who wishes to speak? Going once, going twice, close. I will close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board, and we'll begin with Mr. Swanton. Any questions?
I just, one comment, which is I really like when the architect had the before and after shots on the same page. That just so simplifies the review of the plan, particularly at 10:35 at night. So thank you for that. No, actually, I thought you were very thorough. You hit all the things I was wondering about. I have no questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Shannon.
I've got no questions other than I had to look up what fenestration was. Haven't used that before. Excellent word. Thank
Try
you.
to keep you awake. Try to keep you awake, Mr. Shannon, at 10:35.
Well done. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Shannon, okay. Mr. Bennett.
No questions. Very thorough presentation.
I agree. I have no questions either. So we'll close that portion of the public hearing and go into deliberations. Again, we're deliberating around the criteria for a special permit for nonconformities. So with that in mind, Mr. Swanton, what say you, sir?
I can support this. There are no new nonconformities, and the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing use. It's actually nicer in so many ways, as far as the way it's handled the floodplain, the density, as far as the intensive use, the architecture, many things. And I'm very glad you went to the Historic Commission and got their support. I guess you needed to in this case, but it was, I think it was well done. I can support this.
Very good. Mr. Shannon.
Ditto Mr. Swanton's comments. I can support it.
Good. Mr. Bennett.
I would agree.
All right, and I concur as well. I think it's a pretty clear application. It is well presented as always by every member of the team. So thank you for that. I can support it as well. So we'll close that portion of the public hearing and I will entertain a vote. We have a motion to approve.
This is Ken Swanton. I'll make a motion to approve the application for special permit for nonconformities for 257, 259 Water Street, which is number 22-18.
All right, thank you. And do we have a second?
Mr. Shagnon will second it.
I just have one thing to add. I'm wondering, and maybe this is a question for Caitlin, do I need to add that this project may trigger the tree and sidewalk ordinance? So this needs to be part of the motion?
I don't think you need to add that as a special condition. As usual, we'll have the standard boilerplate condition in the decision.
You'll just put that in. Okay, thank
I will.
you.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so motion's made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Shannon, calling the roll. Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries and the application is approved. So thank you, Attorney Mead, Ms. Manley, and Scott Brown for your participation and your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and all members of the board for all of your patience this evening.
All right, thank you. All right, so that concludes our business in the public hearings this evening. So I will close the public hearing section of our public hearing and we'll go into the business meeting. We have one matter, which is the approval of the minutes. The minutes of 5/24/22. Do we have a motion to approve, or in the alternative, do we have any changes?
So moved, Ken Swanton.
Very good. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Bennett seconds. The motion's made and seconded on the motion to approve the minutes. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. The only update I would say, and we can table this because we'll send around an email, is that the ZBA has been working diligently with the planning department and the mayor's office to find us a physical home as soon as possible so that we can no longer need to be online. So I don't know whether it's going to be City Hall, council chambers. It may not be, but it will certainly be somewhere perhaps in City Hall, elsewhere, and then eventually at the senior center. But efforts are afoot, and we are trying to get this done, not by the next meeting, but in time to publish it by the next meeting for the meeting that follows. So that's coming. Andy, anything you wanted to add?
No, thanks, Chair. I would add just to that point, please be prepared because the hybrid meetings with the equipment we have right now, these so-called owl cameras we've been trying, they do have sometimes mediocre audio. And so just be prepared for trying to hear the communication from the audience remotely. What I have found is actually participating remotely that it sometimes is hard to hear what's happening in the room that the meeting is happening in. So it's actually a little harder to hear folks than when they're standing in front or sitting in front of their computers. So as we transition back to in person again, as the chair mentioned, the next meeting or two, just be prepared for as we try to deal with any connection issues. If there's anybody remotely patching in, there is, as the chair mentioned, an effort to try to have better equipment in the rooms for this stuff to try to maintain the remote connectivity for everybody who wants to do that, because that has been a request that we've received. So we're just trying to make sure that that is done seamlessly. So just be prepared. You might want to talk a little slower and just kind of be prepared for a little bit of a little more process there, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Port. All right. Well, do we have a motion to adjourn? I have no further business. We have a motion to adjourn our hearing tonight.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
Great. Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Any no votes? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And you know, that was tricky with the executive session, but it seemed to go really smooth. So Andy and Caitlin, all the preparation that you guys did to make that look like we knew what we were doing. Thank you.
Oh, well done on your end. Thank you.
All right, guys. Have a great night.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you next time.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Night.